Hey there, everybody. Glad to be here with all of you. We're going to have yet another late night conversation. Let's go.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome. I am glad to be here with all of you tonight, here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. Hope that you all are happy to be here as well. It's a normal Saturday, November 15th, the Ides of November, and we're going to have yet another chat. Following our normal format, first the opening remarks, then the roll call, then I answer your questions for the remainder of the show. So if there's something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the show, send me buy me a coffee. That's the best way to do it. Now, you can also do Rumble Rants. You can cash at me, Caleb Moppin 22. But really, ideally, the best way to give me a question for the second half of the show is buy me a coffee. That's the best way to do it. We are having an event coming up in New Jersey on January 11th. It's going to be a good one, and we'd like to have you there. There's going to be a nice buffet, music, speeches. It's going to be a great event. I hope that you will be there. I'm really looking forward to it. We got a lot of work to do to build it, make it a really good show, make it a tremendous event to kick off the new year of organizing for CPI. So if you're going to be there, please register so we know you're coming ahead of time. It's going to be a great event. We're going to honor some local New Jersey activists. We're going to do a lot of different stuff, good speeches, Q&A, all that stuff. So yeah, we've got that going on. And then, as I said, the second half of the show is all you guys. It is all you guys. So if you've got something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the show, I would appreciate if you would send me a Rumble rant, a Cash App, but the best way, the absolute best way, is to buy me a coffee. Buy me a coffee is the best way to send your questions for the second half of the show. So this afternoon, we had our weekly CPI members check in, which was good. More new members. Someone was on there for their first meeting. People in Boston are meeting with new members, and I'm really happy with how CPI is growing right now. We are experiencing a layer of growth. New people are trickling into the group, which I had a feeling was going to happen. There's that old thing about quality into quantity and all of that. And that I'm going to try to explain tonight a lot of different things. Obviously, we're going to be mainly talking about North Korea, but North Korea kind of fits into a wider understanding that we're developing as CPI. And I'm going to try to explain it from a couple different angles here tonight. But I'm glad that you all are here. I really am glad that you all are here. And we're going to talk about North Korea. We're going to talk about different stuff. After our CPI call, I immediately jumped on to a chat with Chris Cutrone, who is the leader of the Platypus Affiliated Society, which is this academic Marxist group that's been around for quite some time. And he and I went back and forth, and I think some people were expecting us to have a debate or an argument or something. It was really almost like a comparing of notes. Doug Lane of Sublimation Media, he was the moderator, and Chris Cutrone and I both talked about the state of the left and what we thought should be done. And where we thought we should go. And it ended up being quite an interesting conversation. A lot of our views were similar. We saw roughly the same things, noticed the same things, obviously from a different angle. And it was productive, and I'm glad that we recorded it. But all of that is what inspired me to get on here and talk to you all about North Korea. Why does North Korea matter? Why in the world does North Korea matter so much? Well, one reason, I don't know if you saw, is that Russia has been praising North Korea excessively as an essential military partner in the special military operation that is taking place. And we hear Russian government officials talk about how important North Korea is to the fight in the Donbass, how important North Korea was in defeating the Kursk incursion when the Ukrainians, entered Russia. There's a lot there, but there's more to it as well. Now, when we talk about North Korea, we're talking about a country that is so hated by the United States. There is no country in the world that is more hated by the United States than North Korea. North Korea is in a category of countries that are hated, mind you, right? North Korea is in the same category as Cuba. It's in the same category as Iran. It's in a similar category to Russia and China, but not exactly. The USA has to deal with Russia and China because they're bigger countries and bigger economies. But North Korea, Iran, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, now the emerging Union of Sahel states, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. There's a whole category of countries that are part of the rising new economy in the East. But North Korea is singled out for hatred by the United States, by the Western world, in ways that are particularly shocking. Like the movie Team America, World Police, which is like this satirical film made by the South Park guys, Matt Stone and Trey Parker. The way they mocked Kim Jong-il in that film was racist on a level that, it would be one thing if they were to portray Saddam Hussein or portray Fidel Castro, but the level of just vulgar mockery that was unloaded on the North Korean leader. You'll recall, I believe it was Madeleine Albright, the U.S. Secretary of State under Bill Clinton. She met with Kim Jong-il, and she said she was surprised that he was an intelligent person. I mean, you think about that for a minute. What does that mean, right? That she assumed the leader of a country with tens of millions of people in it would be a fool, would be an idiot. But she was so surprised that Kim Jong-il, the father of Kim Jong-un, was an intelligent person. She said she was so surprised. What did she expect him to be? Right. But she expected him to be a cartoon. She expected him to be, kind of what South Park's Matt Stone and Trey Parker portrayed him as. The way that they obsessively demonize North Korea and the way they say things about North Korea that are so ridiculous. The trains there don't work, apparently. The people have to push them. They have no electricity. That's ridiculous, obviously. The stories you hear about North Korea, the way they will just go out of their way, they'll claim things like, in North Korea, they say Kim Jong-il invented the hamburger. Why would they say that? They don't eat hamburgers there, right? They don't even say that, right? It's just an absurd allegation to make. The caricature, the over-the-top caricature that we're given of North Korea, the way North Korea is portrayed as this hell on earth, this evil country where they kill people for breakfast. No one has any freedom. It's just over the top. And I'm not sitting here pretending North Korea is some human rights paradise. They're a country that is militarized and locked down and has been for well over half a century since the Korean War. They lost 4 million people during the Korean War. And if you look at the population, that's a very significant percentage of the population. Every family in the northern half of the Korean Peninsula lost somebody in the Korean War. The USA forced a horrendous man-made famine on them after the fall of the Soviet Union. And, they worked very, very hard to establish food independence and not be dependent on food imports from the Soviet Union or China or any other country. But after the fall of the Soviet Union, they needed oil. They needed petroleum to run their tractors, and their food system that they had worked so hard to build, which was praised by the United Nations for food self-sufficiency, how they're a mountainous country. And they had to learn to, grow crops on the sides of mountains. And, they did a lot to develop food self-sufficiency. But then after the fall of the Soviet Union, you had the dominance of the petrodollar. And as a result, they couldn't get petroleum. They couldn't get gasoline to run their cars with. And as a result, they had a food crisis, a crisis of malnutrition imposed on them by the United States, by the sanctions, where, people were unable to eat. It was a humanitarian crisis imposed on them. The need for that country to be locked down and the need for that country to be secure is massive, but yet they've pulled it off. And many people have observed the crisis that North Korea faced in the 1990s. It was a man-made famine, a crisis of malnutrition caused and imposed by the fall of the Soviet Union, imposed by the dominance of the United States with the petrodollar. They couldn't get oil to run their tractors with. They had a food system that came to a grinding halt, and they were in a disastrous situation. They faced a bunch of floods, and it was a real nightmare what North Korea was subjected to in the early 1990s. But they didn't fall. They did not fall. And we think about it like there are countries in the world that have fallen under much, much more modest problems. You look at it, what they faced, the all-out onslaught, the siege that they faced, the man-made famine, everything that they faced. The founder of the revolution, Kim Il-sung, died. Massive flooding, a food crisis, what North Korea was going through in 1993, 1994, 1995. And yet, the Korean Workers' Party is still in power. That points to something that is important to understand. And that, I think, tells us why North Korea is so hated. North Korea was not always singled out the way it's singled out. During the Cold War, they were just considered another communist country. They were just like Romania, Czechoslovakia. The USA mocked them to some degree or other. They were considered state sponsors of terrorism. The USA put sanctions on them. There was always rumors that the Korean War was going to get going again. But they were not singled out in the way that they have been since the fall of the Soviet Union. And you'll remember that in the 1990s, when they were facing this very disastrous situation, the food crisis and all of that, that was the period of the Sunshine Policy, when South Korea was talking of building a train system through North Korea into China, into Russia, all the way into Europe. That was the period where there started to be, diplomatic, and leaders of North Korea and South Korea were talking to each other and such. And that's when Madeleine Albright went there. A deal was made with North Korea that they don't get nuclear weapons in exchange for North Korea not, receiving, they would receive certain amounts of heating gas, and the U.S. government would help them develop peaceful nuclear energy. And all of that was in exchange for them staying in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But then the U.S. Congress would not fund the deal that Madeleine Albright and Bill Clinton made with North Korea. And then Bush declared them the axis of evil. And after 9/11, North Korea had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. Neither did Iraq, neither did Iran. But I mean, we can all, I mean, at least the mainstream story was that 9/11 was done by people connected to the Middle East, not people connected to the Korean Peninsula. But yet after 9/11, George W. Bush declared them the axis of evil. And at that point, they said, fuck it. And they proliferated their own atomic bomb. And after the USA invaded Iraq, North Korea said Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction. Look what happened to them. And after the USA overthrew Gaddafi in Libya in 2011, they said, wow, Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction. Gaddafi got rid of his nuclear program and his weapons of mass destruction. And look at us. We're still here. We've had nuclear weapons and we've never given them up. And look at us. We're still here. We're still here. And North Korea, it just grinds the gears of Western liberalism on a level that you wouldn't guess. I mean, one thing about North Korea that is worth explaining. So when did the founder of the country, Kim Il-sung, when did he die? When did he die? He died, I believe, in 1994. At the time the Soviet Union had fallen, at the time they were in the middle of a food crisis, at the time they were really suffering. That is when the founder of their country, the George Washington or the Ho Chi Minh of the Korean Peninsula, Kim Il-sung, the legendary anti-Japanese fighter who died, that is when, that is when he died. His name, Kim Il-sung, that's not his birth name. Kim Il-sung was the name of a legendary outlaw, a social bandit in Korean history. Kim Il-sung means Kim becomes the sun, the S-U-N, the sun. Kim becomes the sun. It was an outlaw name because Korea was occupied by Japan, but there was a legendary figure, a Robin Hood of the Korean people, who was mythologized in songs, who fought against Japan and robbed from the rich and gave to the poor. It was like a legendary figure. And as the communists were building their anti-Japanese resistance group, Kim Il-sung, who was going by another name at the time, he formed a particularly effective anti-Japanese fighting group. And they started calling themselves the Kim Il-sung Battalion, after this legendary figure, this Robin Hood. And after a while, the leader of the Kim Il-sung Battalion just started calling himself Kim Il-sung. And it's wild because it was brilliant marketing. Imagine that you're in the Korean Peninsula and you're with Japan, and you have to fight against this rebel group. And the rebel group is called the Robin Hood Fighting Group. The Robin Hood Fighting Group. Now, immediately, everyone who hears their name is going to say, wow, they're called Robin Hood? I mean, it's great marketing. It's brilliant marketing. They took the name of a folk hero, a mythological, legendary anti-Japanese social bandit, and they made it the name of their fighting group, and then they eventually just had the leader of the Korean Workers' Party, the leader of the anti-Japanese resistance, just name himself Robin Hood, Kim Il-sung. I mean, it's brilliant on many, many levels. They fought against the Japanese occupiers, and the government on the Korean Peninsula was led by Kim Il-sung, the leader of the anti-Japanese resistance. And he died in 1994. And when he died, when the country was in the middle of a food crisis, when the country was suffering in the aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Union, everyone expected that North Korea would collapse. So picking his biological son, Kim Jong-il, as the leader was not an accident. It was not random. And it also does not prove that North Korea is a hereditary monarchy. It was a blatant political statement It is, we are keeping the bloodline alive. We have not changed. Everyone expected after the death of Kim Il-sung that there would be a fight between the hardliners of the Korean Workers' Party, the moderates of the Korean Workers' Party, and that North Korea would go the way of Romania and Czechoslovakia and all of that. But instead, Kim Jong-il, the son of Kim Il-sung, assumed leadership, and they said, we're just going to keep going. We're just going to keep going. We're going to do what we did. And after Kim Jong-il passed away, they put a new leader in power. And that new leader was the grandson, Kim Jong-un. Again, making a statement. We are keeping the tradition of Robin Hood. Kim becomes the son. We're still the same people. We're still the same organization. When you listen to North Korea's statements, they have this amazing ability to not be affected by world events, to just focus on what they're doing. And that, I mean, there's a level of, we're here, we're locked down, and we're just going to keep going. And there's a level of dedication and tunnel vision, amazing tunnel vision on the part of the Korean Workers' Party that spiritually scares the Western countries. And they have unloaded every amount of psychological warfare ever. They made a Hollywood movie about assassinating Kim Jong-un. They have subjected them to all kinds of mockery. Anything they can to demoralize the Korean people, but it just doesn't work. And it actually forces me to think. I feel like when it comes to what do you call it? When it comes to ideology and when it comes to economics, we can understand things from a Marxist perspective. We can understand base and superstructure. We can understand the tendency of the falling rate of profit, imperialism, monopolistic capitalism, overproduction, all of that. But when we're talking about psychology and how human beings relate to each other and how loyalty is cemented, sometimes you can get a little bit more insight from the right, because the right, when it comes to psychology, is appealing to deeply embedded sentiments, right? The left and Marx understood economics in a way the right never could, because the right doesn't understand that history is marching forward. The right doesn't have the economic understanding that Marx had. What he called his historical materialism was an understanding of the nature of human society, the nature of mankind as a tool maker, higher modes of production. All of that you get from Marx. But when it comes to building a political movement, when it comes to understanding what motivates people, the right is much better at understanding people's motivations, because the right is often applying to subconscious rather than conscious forces, right? That the right, the conservatives, are rallying around deeply embedded feelings that people have that they're not even aware they have, deeply held sentiments that are just part of human society. That's why they're conservative, right? They're defending the traditional family. They're defending loyalty to the nation, nationalism. The right is tapping into things people believe that they don't even know why they believe, right? They don't have a rational reason. They don't wake up today and say, I'm going to be loyal to the nation. I'm going to build the traditional family. They just do it, right? And that often the right is tapping into aspects of the way human beings organize themselves that are just deeply, deeply embedded. You could almost argue maybe they're even in our DNA to some degree or other, right? We know the family has changed over the course of the thousands of years of human civilization, right? That there was hunter-gatherer civilization, that there was the origin of what we now call the family, but it often involved a man and many different wives, polygamy, but then, the rise of monogamy, and family structures and these kind of things have changed. But you have to argue that on some level, the right has it a little bit easier on the social question, because they are not appealing to things that people logically believe. They are appealing to deeply held beliefs that maybe people learn to justify with logic, but deeply, deeply held beliefs. And North Korea, for some reason, has been able to remain intact in a way the Soviet Union wasn't able to do, in a way that the Eastern Bloc was not able to do, in a way that, that many countries that have been up against imperialism and faced an all-out onslaught haven't been able to do. North Korea has survived what no other anti-imperialist state has survived. It has been subjected to attacks that no other anti-imperialist state has been subjected to, and it has survived those attacks in a way no other anti-imperialist state has managed to. And if you listen to the propaganda of liberalism, North Korea just grinds their gears more than anything. North Korea is just not supposed to be there. It's just like a big argument against liberalism. And North Korea, let's not pretend that they're perfect. Let's not pretend that the way they are is some ideal state of being. They are locked down. They are fighting for their lives. They are not, it's not like they just woke up and said, all right, we want to have only half of the peninsula and we want to be totally militarized. No, they're trying to survive against a lot, but they've managed to do it. And in a lot of my writing, I have revisited one of the critics of Marxism who emerged during the crisis of Marxism after Marx's death, who gets kind of ignored in leftist circles, primarily because his writings were seized upon by fascists. Now, he wasn't a fascist, I guess. Fascism was a new thing. He died in 1924. Fascism was very new at that time, and then he died. At the time of his death, he considered both Mussolini's fascism and Bolshevism and Lenin to be expressions that some of his conceptions had been correct. But he died, and, he never really had an opportunity to really embrace what either government became. He died. He was a French intellectual named Georges Sorel. Georges Sorel. I think I got a picture of him somewhere. I may have to dig up a new picture of him. Georges Sorel. All right, Georges Sorel. Is an important intellectual, and he gets overlooked. And the reason he gets overlooked is because, Bolshevism and Lenin's analysis of why why the Marxist movement of Europe became bankrupt. Lenin's analysis kind of outstripped his. Georges Sorel was a French intellectual in Europe at the time that Marxism was everywhere in the late 1800s, but there was no revolution. As many people in the Marxist movement were saying something is wrong. Before Lenin came along and said, well, it's because of imperialism, before World War I, there were a lot of different people trying to figure out why Marxism was everywhere, but there was no revolution. And one of them was this guy, Georges Sorel. And Georges Sorel was a French intellectual. And his ideas were taken up by what they call syndicalists. And syndicalists were a faction of Marxism that rejected all politics and wanted to just focus on the trade union struggle. They did not vote because they were not interested in getting socialists elected to office. They did not conspire to seize control of the government because they were not interested in the political struggle. They wanted only the economic struggle, syndicalism, right? That focused on the struggle of the employer against the employee and the employee against the employer. Pure and simple trade unionism, but radical trade unionism. The syndicalists would not sign contracts because they argued that the signing a contract was recognizing that the boss had the right to exploit you. And Georges Sorel was existing in France and in Europe in the context of a widespread Marxist movement that was watering everything down and wasn't creating a revolution. And in his alienation from the failure of the Marxist movement in Europe, trying to understand why it failed, he published a pamphlet called Reflections on Violence. And in that pamphlet, he made a spiritual critique of Marxism, of the social democratic movement, saying that it had essentially lost the spiritual power that was necessary to come to power. And he argued that instead of building a mass party, it was necessary to build a sect of people that are heroic. And he argued that instead of trying to build a mass movement that included absolutely everybody, you want to build an isolated group of fanatical men, is what he argued. And in that pamphlet, Reflections on Violence, he makes this interesting statement. And I've quoted it in some of my books before, so I'll just put it on the screen. This is a very interesting way of putting things. And, I am an optimist. I am definitely an optimist. George Sorel was not. George Sorel was a pessimist. But in his critique of optimism, this is what he pointed out. He said, "It seems to me the optimism of Greek philosophers depended a great extent on economic reasons. It probably arose from the rich and commercial urban populations who were able to regard the universe as an immense shop full of excellent things to satisfy their greed. I imagine Greek pessimism sprang from the poor warlike tribes living in the mountains who were filled with enormous aristocratic pride, but whose conditions were correspondingly poor. Their poets probably charmed them and made them look forward to the triumphal expeditions conducted by superhuman heroes. They explained their present wretchedness to them by relating catastrophes in which semi-divine former chiefs had succumbed to fate or the jealousy of the gods." And he goes on. "The tribe must remain faithful to the old customs in order to be ready for great and victorious expeditions that might very well take place in the near future. Religions constitute a very troublesome problem for the intellectualist, where they can neither regard them as being without historical importance, nor can they explain them. The ideas of socialism cannot be kept intact by diluting the phrases of Marx into verbose commentaries, but by continually adopting the spout of Marx, which are capable of assuming a revolutionary aspect." Now, what is George Sorel saying? He's talking about ancient Greece and how the optimistic philosophers lived in the cities and were where there was markets, where there was goods being sold, and that's what was the basis of their optimism. But the pessimists were the ones living in the mountains and were sticking to the old ways. And rather than trying to get the best deal on the market and trying to just gain more in the moment, trying to figure out and maneuver how they could get what they wanted in the short term, they were saying, if we stay true to our principles and we don't back down and we stick with what we believe and we don't succumb and we just stay locked in our ways, we can be victorious and we can be immovable. And that was George Sorel's critique of the Marxist movement. He was saying that the Marxist movement was diluting the phrases of Marx into verbose commentaries. But rather, there was something about religion, there was something about Greek pessimists and those tribes up in the mountains who just stuck with their ways that made them much stronger. That the optimistic currents watered things down and compromised, hoping they could gain in the short term. But the pessimists just stuck in their ways and said, we shall not be moved. We are going to stick by what we're for, come hell and high water. And in the end, we're going to survive. It's almost like Aesop's fables, right? The tortoise and the hare, right? They used to tell us that story when I was a kid. Famous story from ancient Greece of like, there's a turtle, a tortoise, and a rabbit, a hare, and they're going to have a race, but it's a long race. And who's going to win? Well, you would assume it would be the rabbit, except the rabbit speeds ahead, but eventually runs out of breath. Whereas the tortoise, the turtle, just goes very slowly, and just keeps going. And after it looks like there's no way that the turtle can win. The rabbit is so far ahead, but then the rabbit runs out of energy, runs out of gas, and it's panting and catching, and the turtle just keeps going. But eventually the turtle passes the rabbit because it's a long race. And because the turtle isn't excited, the turtle is not, and the turtle just keeps going, and eventually the turtle that's very slow wins the race because the turtle has the ability to just keep going. It doesn't run out of gas, doesn't go fast, doesn't get super excited, isn't jumping and reacting. It just keeps going. It just keeps going. When you think about North Korea, that's kind of what North Korea has the ability to do. North Korea isn't, they're not a gigantic player on the world stage, but they just keep going. They just keep going. They just keep going. And if you listen to North Korea and their statements, you listen to their speech they gave at the United Nations, they're not really, they talk about the world. They honor Palestine. They are supporting Russia in the special military operation, but they also, their focus is on building new housing. Their focus is on expanding their food production. Their focus is on keeping their traditions alive. Sure, Kim Il-sung is dead, but then they had Kim Jong-il. Now they have Kim Jong-un, and they've got their Juche ideology, and they just keep going, and they just keep going, and they just keep going, and they just keep going. Right? And George Sorel is not disagreeing with Marx's economics at all. Right? If you read Reflections on Violence, he considers himself to be a Marxist, but he's saying that there is, the problem is not in Marx's economics. The problem is in the Second International, the Marxist movement, that is watering everything down and trying to build this massive group. And he's saying that's not the way to do it. And instead, he's talking about these tribes out in the mountains of ancient Greece that stick with their ways, that don't view the universe as an immense shop full of excellent things to satisfy their greed. He's speaking of the poor, warlike tribes living in the mountains, filled with enormous aristocratic pride, but whose conditions are correspondingly poor, and how their poets charmed them and made them look forward to triumphal expeditions conducted by superhuman heroes. They explained their present wretchedness by relating catastrophes in which semi-divine former chiefs had succumbed to the fate and jealousy of the gods. That the tribe must remain faithful to old customs in order to be ready for great and victorious expeditions. And then he goes on to say religions constitute a very troublesome problem for the intellectualist, for they cannot regard them as being without historical importance, but they also can't explain them. And that Sorel is saying that the problem of the Marxist movement in Europe at the time he's writing is not a problem of understanding economics. It's a problem of understanding how human beings relate to each other. That's the problem. And that there is something deeply conservative in the way people relate to each other. And that holding an organization or holding a nation or a tribe together is actually something that requires tapping into things that are not conscious, that are not intellectualized, things that we really can't explain. And if you look at North Korea, you can't intellectually explain it, right? You can't say, well, the reason that North Korea is thoroughly intact and they faced horrendous bombing and years of being in a state of war and being locked down, and they faced the food crisis, that's explainable because of the price of wheat and no, you can't do that. There's something going on there. There's some kind of spiritual power in North Korea that we can't explain. That they have bonded together in a way that is very, very effective. And that they've built a society that is very, very, very collectivist, very, very authoritarian, but also very, very resilient and very, very able to withstand in a way that the Western countries can't explain, but it also drives them up the wall. And that's very, very clear. And that North Korea, there's almost a seething with anger. North Korea is not supposed to exist, but it does. North Korea defies logic, defies our values, everything that the Western system is telling us about human beings. that we're all inherently selfish, that we all are just another animal that just wants more, and it doesn't fit. Everything that we're told about human beings and how they operate and how they see each other and how they relate to each other, everything the Western world tells us about human beings and our nature is true. No North Korea, but yet there's North Korea year after year after year. And I mean, they change. They're not the same as they were in the 50s. They're not the same as they were in the 60s. They're changing, but as much as they change, they still stay the same. And again, like tortoise and the hare, they just keep going. And there's something about that is really, really important. And the fact that they're now on the battlefield in Donbass, they're such an important ally of Russia. It's really important. I mean, there's something about North Korea that is very, very special and very, very important. And I think about that a lot, honestly. I think about that a lot. How is it? I'll tell you my experiences with North Korea, right? I'll just tell you, I'll do a little segment, North Korea and me. What are my experiences with North Korea? Well, my first interaction with the North Koreans was in Ecuador, and I think I have a picture of it here. This is the first time I ever met a North Korean. Let me see if I can find the picture. Yeah, here's the first time I ever met the North Koreans. Right? That's me in 2013 in Quito, Ecuador, with two representatives of the Kim Il-sung youth of North Korea. Right? And I'm there with three members of the Workers' World Party and myself. I guess four of us. We were all in the Workers' World Party. And this was at the World Festival of Youth and Students in 2013 in Quito, Ecuador. And North Korea was a really big part of that festival. They flew an entire airplane, an entire jet, to the festival of their own. They had their own airplane. They had their own big, huge tent. They had a choir, a North Korean choir that performed every night. Every night there'd be a plenary in the big auditorium, the outdoor auditorium at the festival. It was in the Bicentennial Park in Quito, Ecuador. And every night the North Korean choir would perform. And they were a really, really big part of the 2013 World Youth Festival in Quito, Ecuador. And that's the first time I ever encountered a North Korean. And I've told the story many times, but I will tell it again, of when I was in the airport in Quito, Ecuador. So the World Youth Festival is happening. And, the way it works is you don't need a visa to enter the country for the World Youth Festival. You just need your, invitation to the World Youth Festival. I think Americans can go to Ecuador without a visa anyway. So we get there and we show them that we're there for the World Youth Festival. And so they take us to a certain part of the airport there in Quito, Ecuador. And we get there and there's communists from all over the world, from Vietnam and Cuba and Greece and Spain and Britain and Australia and France and Belgium and Sri Lanka and India and all of that. And we're there and we're just in the airport. And there's all these communist young people from all over the world wearing their T-shirts and handing each other newspapers and all of that. And then a whisper came over the crowd that the North Korean plane, had just landed. And I remember everyone in the airport grew silent. We started nervously getting quiet. And then the doors flew open. Bam! And they marched into the airport in perfect formation. And the men were wearing suits and ties. And the women were wearing traditional Korean gowns. And they marched in perfect formation. And everyone was dead silent. Oh my God, there's North Korea, the country that we've all been told is Satan, the country we've all been told is evil, the hermit kingdom, the forgotten, the mysterious, scary land that's far, far away, where you get shot for breathing or telling jokes, and everything we've been told about North Korea. The whole airport just goes silent, just completely silent. And then one person started applauding. Then another person started applauding, and pretty soon this whole airport was thunderously cheering for North Korea. It was an amazing moment, just an utterly amazing moment. Everyone's applauding, and of course, tears are rolling down my face, and I'm thinking about all the millions of Koreans that the United States has murdered ruthlessly in the Korean War and everything. And I'm just like, wow, it was a big moment. And that was the first time I ever met a North Korean. And, we met them. They gave me some books that I still have, right? I still have this, what is this? This book, the life, what is it? Yeah. The history of the revolutionary activities of President Kim Il-sung, right? They gave us nice book. And I think I have like some children's books and some novels they gave us, right? Here's a novel they gave us, which I don't quite, I found it quite difficult to read. Immortal History, Revolutionary Aurora, a cycle of novels. And I guess there's just something I'm missing. I wasn't able to quite get into it. It's a novel about Korean history or something. And they had their event. They were there at the festival. We met with them, and they talked about how they hate the fascist government of the United States. That's what they called it, but they have no hatred for the American people. It was really an exciting meeting. It was really a great opportunity to be able to meet with the North Koreans. A few years later, I wrote an article for a Russian web magazine. And after I wrote it, I received a Facebook message telling me that it had been published in the North Korean daily newspaper. They had translated it into Korean. I wrote this essay called Let's Talk About Korea. And I guess they translated my essay into Korean. I guess they have a daily newspaper called Rodong Singmun. And yeah, this is my article that I wrote about North Korea, translated into Korean and published in their daily newspaper, an article I wrote defending them. And I've been to a number of World Youth Festivals since then. I've shaken hands with North Koreans. I've talked to them. Lately, though, they don't really want to talk to Americans. They don't really want to talk to Americans because, they had the meetings with Trump and it looked like things were going in a good direction, but then they didn't. They stopped going in a good direction. And so, at this point, we've printed a special book that we brought to the World Youth Festival in 2024 for the North Koreans. We gave it to them and they looked at it and they're like, okay, whatever. They just don't want to talk to you. I mean, they're not talking to Americans right now. Which, do you blame them? And I think if there's going to be peace on the Korean Peninsula, it's tied up at this point. It's intrinsically tied up with the war in Ukraine. There has to be peace in the Donbass, peace between Russia and Ukraine, peace between Russia and NATO. And at the same time, then we can have peace on the Korean Peninsula. But the peace process that Trump started in his first term is now frozen. It's pretty solidly frozen because of the fact that it was all undone, that John Bolton and Mike Pompeo sabotaged it. And then Biden really undid it with nuclear threats and all of that. And so, now, North Korea has hinted that they will meet with Trump again. Trump has said there is going to be a meeting. We were hoping it would happen at the APEC summit when Trump was in Korea. It hasn't happened yet. Everything's on hold. Everything's on hold right now. And, we can only hope. We can only hope. We can only hope. But there's something about North Korea. And if you read, the work of Kim Il-sung, you study the Juche ideology, and you read their statements, you'll get it. You'll get it. There is an element. There's a really, really, really strong focus on we can do it ourselves. That's Juche means self-reliance. And there's a big amount of, be friends with us if you want, or don't. We can do it ourselves. We don't need you. We don't need you, and we're not worried about you. We can do it ourselves. So can you please, either make a deal with us or don't, but we're just going to keep going, right? Slow and steady wins the race. And that is something, there's a spiritual power from North Korea that I find to be just completely amazing. And honestly, as much as I don't even want to make this comparison, North Korea is a country that has sacrificed millions of lives in order to industrialize. Half the Korean Peninsula is still under the domination of the United States, and they are, and I mean, there's so many, but in a weird way, like you can almost look at North Korea as like a model for how do you hold out and continue in hostile terrain. How do you do that? How do you do that? Because there is an element of learning to have tunnel vision and learning to just focus on not compromising your principles and just keep going and just not worry about it and just keep doing what you do and keep being who you are and keep holding yourself together and focusing on what you need to accomplish and not worrying about anything else. There's an element of tunnel vision, or they talk about the eye of the tiger, right? That's in the Rocky movies. They talk about the eye of the tiger. And what that is I guess the tiger, when it's like got its prey, it like keeps its eyes like focused on the prey. That's what that refers to. And it's really important. And I actually want to talk tonight, before I end my opening remarks, I want to just talk about what CPI has done lately. So, we are experiencing a mild uptick, I would say, a mild uptick in relevance right now as an organization. Not a huge, we're not, surging, but I don't think we can count on like a surge. It's a mild uptick. And the reason that we had our mild uptick is related to this, right? I wrote this book. And the reason I wrote this book is because Nick Fuentes and a lot of people in the MAGA movement were talking about neoconservatives. And they were talking about neocons and how they're tied to Trotsky. And they were talking about the Congress for Cultural Freedom. And multiple people were saying, oh my God, Caleb, Nick Fuentes is talking about the stuff you talked about 3 years ago. And I said, you know what? I can tell this story better than anybody else. So I wrote the book. And I didn't write it slow. I churned this book out as quickly as I possibly could. I drew from all the years of research I've done and all the studies I did on the split in the SWP in 1939 and Max Shachtman and my time in the Workers' World Party and this Congress for Cultural Freedom and all this stuff. And I just put together one little volume. I've put it out there. And that volume, I noticed at any time I streamed about it, anytime I did like a slideshow about Trotsky and the neoconservatives, got a lot of views. Thought, okay, fine, great. And so then this guy, Academic Agent, he apparently watched this stuff. And in the name of being anti-Trotsky, he's a right-wing guy. He got into this pro-Stalin rabbit hole, even though he's a conservative. And he started promoting Grover Furr's writings. And he's, been having streams talking about what I'm always talking about, how the Soviet Union rapidly industrialized and the idea that they were all just poor and starving. No, the Soviet Union had a very, very substantial amount of economic expansion when the rest of the planet was having the Great Depression. He's talking about that on his streams. And it seems that has made such a dent that I showed you Nick Fuentes, who is anti-communist, racist, and all of that, has had to make videos where he mildly talks good about Stalin while repeating the claim that he killed millions of people, while Nick Fuentes is oddly saying good things about Stalin now. And it's partially related to Russia, and Russia pushing its traditional conservatism and being up against the woke left and Russia and for some reason in the Nick Fuentes universe, we intervened, we put this out, we attracted their attention, and we kind of pushed forward a current, not even really intentionally, kind of intentionally, but not really. There was interest in this topic amid dissident MAGA. We then said, okay, they should learn about it from us because we know what we're talking about. We put this out. And that pushed things even further. And that led from simply hating neocons because there used to be Trotskyists, suddenly that led to liking Stalin and then identifying with Russia because Russia's and so now there's this blow up in the Nick Fuentes universe, and they're asking questions and they're interested in historical topics and analysis, and they are looking for something that they realize that only we can provide. Oh, good, great. Not guaranteeing it will last. And I know how influencers are. Influencers, I mean, with all due respect, right, to any influencers out there, influencers are very selfish. Influencers are not activists and organizers. They're not, they're not part of in real life community, and they're very concerned about how they look and optics and all of that. So I'm not saying it's going to last, but for a moment, it seems like there's a lot of eyes on our work and our ideological breakthroughs and our critique of Trotskyism, our critique of liberalism, our drawing from the lessons of the Soviet Union, etc. And we've made ourselves relevant in an important conversation, and that some of the forces, some of the influencers who don't like us, but have tried to mimic our content, have tried to get in on the action, but they're just not capable. I'm not going to get specific about it, but I'm not the only person to have gotten interviewed by Academic Agent. And if you look at the audience, I mean, they know who knows their shit and who thinks about this deeply, and they know who doesn't. All right. And that's just the reality. Read the comments on the videos. Look at the polls that are being done. And, I'm sure me just saying that is going to lead to a bunch of, rigging and all of that, but it doesn't change the reality, right? There's us, and there are those who try to displace and mimic us. And, it's just, some of us are capable of providing what these people on the dissident MAGA are looking for in their delving into history, and they're asking of ideological questions, and some people are not. And we are able to answer things in ways that others are not. And, our knowledge comes from correct practical experience. There's a famous essay by Mao Zedong, "Where do correct ideas come from?" You should go read it. Where do correct ideas come from? Well, correct ideas come from correct practical experience, right? It's a matter you have to have actually organized before. You have to actually have built an organization. You can't know this stuff intellectually. You have to know it through hands-on experience. There's no way around that, right? As much as you might feel like, well, I can read about it, well, we have the hands-on experience. I've been doing this for a long time. And this is just one example of a method that we are figuring out. So what did we do during the election, during the 2024 election? What did we do? We did Peace MAGA. And what was that? What was Peace MAGA? Well, I'll show you. I will show you. I've shown it before, but I don't care. I'll show it again. This is when we kicked off in the last month of the 2024 elections. This is what we did. So we just loaded up the banner and the PVC pipes, and we're headed up to Central Park. Let's see how this goes. We have the banner out, and now we're getting the zip ties on. How's it going, guys? All right. All right. 1, 2, 3. Oh, beautiful. Nope, it's not gonna hold. So now we want to cut some poles in, cut the other pole in half. All right, so we're here at Trump Tower. Noah and I made it. We seem to have lost track of Phil along the way. He stopped to buy some water. Hopefully he's with us soon, but mission is accomplished. We got the banner to Trump Tower. Only peace can make America great again.
This is the man that we want Donald Trump to be. Here on this banner, you will see the greatest thing that Donald Trump did in his entire presidency. He went and became the first president to ever visit the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea. This is a country that's been technically at war with the United States since the 1950s.
Donald Trump shaking hands with oligarchs told you we're our enemies. They told you these people are horrible. They told you these people are terrible, that they will never do anything good for us. There's a reason for that. It's called money. It's called power. They want to weaken you mentally. They want to capture your spirit, stomp you out, and tell you, why bother? Why get out of bed in the morning? Why do anything worthwhile? No. Understand, peace is possible, but you must give it a chance. Giving peace a chance is giving yourself a chance.
We are here to say that only peace can make America great again. And that what Donald Trump did on North Korea, that was awesome. And we want that to continue. We want more peace negotiations. We want more trade. We want more diplomacy.
The real America is not with the bankers, it's not the criminals on Wall Street.
We don't control our government anymore. And our republic is being run by powerful forces that are very much unelected or subverting our democracy.
Rebuild America. Rebuild our country instead of bombing countries around the world. We need Donald Trump to stand up to the military-industrial complex. We need Donald Trump to stand up to the war lobby.
We want to put America first and not the criminals who are lining their pockets on Wall Street with American taxpayer money to go bomb children overseas.
Believe the oligarchs at your own peril. Believe them and sleep under a bridge. Believe them and not have a job. Believe them and understand you'll never have health care. Believe them and see what you get. Let's believe in one another. Let's believe that peace is possible.
It's going good. I mean, people have been reacting well. Small crowds will form when we have the bullhorn out, and then we'll take a break for a little bit and they'll disperse. Earlier, the Secret Service came by. I thought that was interesting. I think we're making an impact.
Russia's not our enemy. China's not our enemy. North Korea is not our enemy. Our enemy is the war lobby. Our enemy is the military-industrial complex. And if we really love America, we should demand that they take all the money they spend on bombs and tanks and weapons and rebuild this country.
Only peace will make America great again. We need to go back to this moment when Donald Trump, the President of the United States of America, went to a country that we have technically been at war with since 1952 and said, let's give peace a chance. We want Trump to be a peace candidate. Every poll says that the American people want peace.
We're out here doing amazing work today, speaking out loud and proud about what we should be doing about making the world a better place. I'm really excited about it. Everyone has been amazing. Our message is getting through to people. I heard people actually talking as I walked by, saying, give peace a chance.
We need jobs and schools and healthcare and education in this country, not wars around the world, not death, destruction, and militarism. Only peace can make America great again. Why is it that people in North Carolina are left stranded while the National Guard is in the Middle East? America's working families have been left behind while our leaders focus on wars in other countries. America first means working families first. It means no more wars. It means offering a hand of friendship and cooperation to countries around the world.
We are out here in front of Trump Tower today to say we deserve that and we do not want World War III.
That's right. They want to weaken you mentally. They want to capture your spirit, stomp you out, and tell you, why bother? Why get out of bed in the morning? Why do anything worthwhile? No.
Americans don't want their tax dollars to be dumped into a hole, funding wars around the world so that bankers on Wall Street can play a game of dominating the economies of the world, while Americans are starving in ditches all across this country, while there are homeless people sitting 3 blocks from the White House. In the richest country on the face of the earth, so-called, you have homeless people on every block, on every street, on every city. Why is that?
Only peace can make America great again. Only peace can make America great again. Only peace can make America great again.
If Donald Trump wants to get back in the White House, we say that he needs to do what the American people want him to do, and that is to make peace around the world.
Let's stand up for each other. Let's believe in one another. Let's believe that peace is possible.
Only peace can make America great again, and this is the man that we want Donald Trump to be. This brought tears to my eyes. I was so moved when it happened. To see the President of the United States and the President of North Korea shaking hands. This is what the new world could be. This is who we want Donald Trump to be. We want him to be a peace president. We want him to be a peace candidate in this election.
I'm hungry. I'm really, really hungry. I mean, it was hard work walking it over here. It was like a 2-mile walk? Yeah. Felt like it. And it's the wind. It's like a big sail.
Challenging but rewarding.
You know, we actually had fun.
We're the Center for Political Innovation, and we are out here saying only peace can make America great again.
Yeah. So what did we do? And shout out to Phil, Noah, Briggy, Irving. You know, it was a great day. What did we do? Well, there was a situation where we had Trump running for president, and part of his campaign was claiming that he would stop wars. And so we found a good moment in his presidency, in his first term. We highlighted it, we boosted it. You know, we took that banner to New York City Public Library. We took that banner to Madison Square Garden when Trump was speaking, and we ended up getting interviewed by the New Yorker. We were highlighted in New Yorker magazine for having that banner. We took that banner to Trump's inauguration, and we were featured on Radio Free Europe and a number of outlets, you know, as we were outside of Capital One Arena, you know, distributing that, you know, distributing pamphlets and holding up that banner. You know, it's what we can do, right? We saw a situation where, hey, this is a way we can insert ourselves into the conversation, just like we did with the Trotsky book. And so we did it. Another thing, right? Before that, 4 years prior to 2024, in the year of 2020, Kamala Harris was running for president, and she lost the Democratic primary. But then it became very clear Joe Biden was very likely to pick her to be his nominee for vice president. And so I wrote a book. I had done some research, you know, was bored, stuck at home during the pandemic. So I wrote a book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts. A short little book that I wrote about Kamala Harris. It's not really about Kamala Harris that much. It's about what we can learn from her, the problems facing leftism, it's about a lot more than Kamala Harris. I wrote this book, published it September 2020. No big deal. Got some reviews, whatever. And then 4 years later, on the very day that Kamala Harris became the nominee of the Democratic Party for president, we had our book banned by Amazon. And suddenly, the outrage was massive. And this book we sold it on Lulu like hotcakes. We sold it on Gumroad as a PDF. We sold it everywhere. This book blew up. And I was on every channel talking about it. And we didn't stop there, right? We had all this money coming in from the book sales. So what did we do? We printed this book in bulk. We edited a new edition with a new cover, and we printed 1,000 copies of it. And we took those copies to Chicago, and we handed them out at the Democratic National Convention in bulk, right? Banned on Amazon. This is what we handed out at the Democrat National Convention. It was great. And 1,000 copies of this were just given out, you know, outside the Democratic National Convention. We inserted ourselves into the conversation. There's other things that we've done, right? The USA was bombing Yemen. Very little is known about the Houthis. So we wrote our own book, Who Are the Houthis and What Are They Fighting For? And we distributed it in bulk at Palestine rallies. We've gotten this out. It's a way to intervene in the conversation. Recently, the No Kings rallies were happening. And we are not thrilled with the Democrat Party. And we're certainly not thrilled with the desire to oust Trump because he might be too friendly to Russia, right? There are obviously great criticisms to make of Trump around Epstein, around Palestine, etc. But the No Kings rallies were coming from a bad place. So our members went to the No Kings rallies and shouted, "Hands off Venezuela," and disrupted the No Kings rallies around the country, in Chicago and in Minneapolis and in Iowa and in Los Angeles. We had a presence at the No Kings rallies shouting, "Hands off Venezuela." And that we continue to find a way to make what we're saying and our message, our analysis, part of the conversation. And as we do it, new people join, right? People joined us in Chicago. Penny joined us because she attended the Democrat National Convention and she had heard about us on social media. And then she met Gabby, who was at the Mexican American Museum giving out copies of the Kamala Harris book. And she joined our organization. And Penny in Minneapolis has started a whole Minneapolis wing of our group based on meeting Gabby at the Democratic National Convention, handing out this book, right? There's a new member in Chicago who months and months ago, in the lead up to our convention, we went to Palestine and hands off Iran rallies in Chicago. We handed this out. People were impressed. He became a member in Chicago. And we've developed relationships because of this. And when we stood with Uhuru and, and this is, again, and it's not like there's not going to be a get-rich-quick scheme. You can't really have a get-rich-quick scheme in organizing. That's actually one thing. You can have a get-rich-quick scheme in terms of money, right? You might win the lottery or buy a stock that blows up or something like that. But in organizing involves people. And in order to have an organization with people in it, you have to have people, and those people have to be organized. It takes people to organize people. And so we've been building ourselves up over the past few years. CPI started, we had our first in real life meetup in 2021, and we've gone through different leaps and evolutions, but we've been gradually building ourselves up by seeing events like the Uhuru movement getting raided by the FBI, like the election with Trump, like the Kamala Harris book, like the Houthis, like hands off Venezuela. These are just examples of things that we have done where we've inserted ourselves into the conversation, made ourselves relevant, met new people, plugged new people into the group, and here we are. And I increasingly find myself thinking about George Sorrell and what he said about the pessimistic warriors who stuck with their ways, knowing that it would pay off. I think about North Korea and how, yes, they obviously they're tuned into world events, but they say, look, we're just going to have to keep doing what we're doing. And I think about, how now, because of the Trotsky book, we're having a little bit of an uptick. We've had a significant number of new memberships recently. Welcome new members. I appreciate it. And I think about all of this, and I think about, there's an element of we just got to keep doing what we're doing. We're anti-imperialists. Our message is correct. We understand this on a level that nobody else understands this. Nobody. We're right. But right takes some time to prove itself. Takes some time. Right doesn't necessarily prove itself immediately. It takes some time to prove itself. And gradually, we're just kind of showing ourselves to be where it's at. And we're just going to keep plugging away. And we're going to keep going. We're going to keep solidifying and building up our own ranks. We're having an event in January to kick off the new year of organizing, right? That's our event that I've been promoting, right? Earth is Awakening. America should join. This is our event in New Jersey on January 11th, right? It's coming up. After that, at that event, we're going to announce the date of next year's convention. Our next convention that we have next year will probably be in August. And we're going to announce the date and location of next year's convention. And then after that, between January, our January event, and next year's convention, we're going to have a series of regional workshops where we meet new people, right? We've done it before in LA, in Minneapolis, in Chicago, and we're going to do it again. And we're going to have regional workshops to build up for the big convention in August. And of course, we'll have days of action and we'll have leafleting campaigns. We have a leafleting campaign aimed at food banks right now. When people were losing their food stamps because the government shut down, that was very effective. And we have reading groups, right? We're studying the Khrushchevism book, right? We have learned through the course of building our organization how they tear apart organizations. So this book This isn't a history of Khrushchev. It's not a biography of Khrushchev. It's not a deep analysis of the secret speech. It's not Grover Furr's Khrushchev Lied. This book is about psychological warfare. And it's about how organizations are destroyed, how the global communist movement was devastated by Khrushchev's tirade in 1956. And this book is organizational technology. And now everyone who joins CPI has to read this book and has to be in a study group about this book. And our friends, people that aren't even members, are getting involved in this. And we are getting people into the organization with an understanding of what they are going to be hit with and what the enemy will throw at them and how they will be manipulated and how they will try to tear you down and how they will try to demoralize you. And our members are reading this book and understanding why the organization in and of itself is a precious thing and why the organization is worth fighting for and why the organization will benefit you. And we now have a piece of organizational technology with which people can be brought into the group and prepared to withstand in the face of the attacks of the enemy. And know what the enemy is going to throw at them and know what they're going to be lied about, what half-truths and manipulations and what impulses within them are going to be appealed to. And our membership is going to be solidified. And it's already working. And the study groups we've had around this book have been very effective and have brought out amazing insights from our members. So we've got this now. And we had one great convention last summer. We've got a book of the convention with all the speeches, full color book with all the speeches and everything. And in August, we're going to have another convention. And it's going to be great. Folks, we've got a movement. It's not a huge movement. It's not, this isn't Marcus Garvey with millions of people in the Black community joining his movement in the 1920s. This isn't, Dr. Martin Luther King's civil rights movement or anything like that. This isn't, I can think of great mass movements in history. We're nowhere near that. But this is a movement that we've got. It's a movement that is growing and building and solidifying and intervening. We are engaging in the mass line from the masses to the masses, leading while learning, learning while leading. And we follow the old rule, no preaching without teaching and no teaching without preaching. If someone's preaching at you, but they're not helping you learn anything, then their preaching is just hollow bombast. And if someone is teaching you something, but in the process of teaching it to you, they're not inspiring you and they're not encouraging you to get involved and take your knowledge and put it into practice and try to make the world a better place, then their teaching is worthless as well. No teaching without preaching. No preaching without teaching. From the masses to the masses. Find out what is on the masses' minds and give it to them. But give it to them in a way that shows what you have to offer, in a way that only you can offer it. And that's what we're engaged in doing. And don't get excited. And don't chase after every little blip and everything. Just slow and steady wins the race. Slow and steady wins the race. We're building an anti-imperialist movement. We have an understanding and a depth that no one else has. We have answers that no one else has. We have an understanding, and we are building up organizational technology and organizational methods that are very, very effective. And if people want to work with us, great. And if they don't, okay. We're not chasing after anybody. We're not begging for a seat at anyone's table. We're just doing what we're doing. And we're going to keep doing it. And we continue to pop up in the conversation. We continue to make ourselves important and relevant. I continue to fly to Russia and be in the same room as the Russian president. I was just in Russia a couple weeks ago. And I was at a gala where the Russian president gave a speech. President Rafael Correa was there. George Galloway was there. You know, I mean, our members are flying overseas. We're getting invitations, and you know, I mean, stuff is happening. Yeah, we are very relevant. We're getting shit done. We're teaching, we're educating, we're organizing. And you can be part of it too if you want. Sign up, go to the website, push join. That easy. But if you don't want to, that's fine too. This isn't for everybody. This isn't for everybody. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share with you all tonight. And I thought I'm kind of using North Korea to make a statement. So on that note, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names of location, names and locations. And then after the roll call, I'll start answering your questions. So names and locations. Who's with us? Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Ryan in Kansas City. Good to see you, Ryan. Good to see you. Good to see you. Penny in Minneapolis. Good to see you. St. David's, Bermuda. Lawrence Johnson in Chicago. Bendigo, Australia. David Fox. Maria in Wyoming. John McCarthy in Chicago. B.A. Baracus in California. Rose, the turtle. Matteo in Italy. Names and locations. Names and locations. Robert in New Jersey. Divisions in the ruling class being delivered tomorrow. Hope you like it. Jane in New Zealand. Good to see you. Bill in Tasmania. Good to have you with us. Bill. Is there anyone who's named Bill and it's not short for William? Right? Bill is usually short for William, but is there any other Bill names? Like Bill could be short for. Names and locations. Marvin in New Jersey. Have you signed up? Are you coming to the event? Marvin, I hope to see you there. Jeff in Delaware. That's not too far from New Jersey. Hope you can make it. Gabby in Chicago. Good to see you. Wilbur. All right. Wilbur. Names and locations. Anybody else? Names and locations. Stoke-on-Trent, pottery capital of the United Kingdom. Faramook in Seattle. Miguel. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us? Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Names and locations. Always good to have people engaging with us and such. So if you would like to ask a question for the second half of the show, the best way to do it is to buy me a coffee. Oh, Bill Parson in Sanford, North Carolina. Buy me a coffee. Buy me a coffee is the best way to ask questions. Oh, Jenny in Cincinnati. So if you can buy me a coffee and send your questions, Richard sent a couple questions already, like after I streamed last night. And then we got a question from Sam that has come in. But yeah, if people want to send more questions, that would be good. I am going to put on some music, give you all a chance to buy me a coffee while I put on some music. The question, though, is what music will I put on? And I'm tempted to put on something I've already downloaded, but something I haven't played recently. So I'm looking through what songs do I have upon my desktop that would be good to put on, right? The music that we play on here is part of the thrill of what we do here. So what music do I have that I can put on that would be good? That would be good. I'm looking through. I see. I want to put on something that's like not the kind of thing I normally put on. I put Cardew music on a lot, and I really like the Cardew music, and we might do some of that later tonight. But I think I owe you guys some non-Cardew music, right? What should I put on? What music should I put on? What would be good music to put on? Good music to put on that's not Cornelius Cardew music. That's not the normal thing. I'm just going through my desktop. What songs do I have on here? How about Over the River Charlie? Right? The bluegrass anthem in honor of Bonnie Prince Charlie, the Jacobite leader of Scotland. Here we go. Over the River, Charlie. Send me.
Hey, how's everybody doing? Yeah. I want to thank Aaron and Mark for asking us to play here tonight. And yeah, I'm going to play a couple songs for you. We'll probably play a couple during the intermission too if you want to hang out and listen. And any shepherds out there? Anybody herding sheep? All right, this one's for you.
It's called Over the River, Charlie.
I love that kind of music. I really do. You know, if any got any more questions, you can send them via Buy Me a Coffee, and Rumble Rant, you know, Cash App, Caleb Moppa 22. All right. So I want to quickly mention where I'm going to be tomorrow. yeah, I just love this kind of music. I really do. I have a deep appreciation for this kind of music. So tomorrow, if you go to the CPI website, shout out to Phil, right? Phil is in the chat. He's one of our members in New York City, is a beloved member of our community. Phil, he was in that video you just saw. Phil wrote an article for the website about how the main church the church, the institution, the movement, whatever you want to call it, that is probably the most responsible for Donald Trump visiting North Korea during his first term, the unification movement. Their leader is in prison, in pretrial detention in South Korea. And so tomorrow there's going to be a rally in New York City, sponsored by the American Christian Leadership Council to free Dr. Hak Jahan. I'm going to it, and I'm representing CPI. And it's really important. It's going to be, that relationship that we have, just like our relationship with Uhuru, just like our relationship with a lot of people, you cannot, in real life organizing, you need allies. And if we focused on who we agreed with in intellectual concepts, we wouldn't have any friends. But we focus on getting stuff done. And when Trump went to North Korea, that was a great step forward. And he did it because the Unification Church, they sponsored projects, where there was Think Tank 2020, it was called, that helped make it happen. And, they did a lot of work. And now their leader, who is 82 years old and just had heart surgery, she is in prison. And they gave her 3 days to go to the hospital. And then they took her back to prison. And her trial starts on Tuesday. She's being tried for bribery. I mean, it's really crazy. And so, they have asked me, and I helped them organize a rally, and I'm going to it, and I'll be at their rally tomorrow. And I'm very proud to have been there. And I'm proud of Phil for writing this great article for the website about it. You can read the details of the case. And that, again, is this a group that agrees with all of everything CPI stands for? Of course not. But we can agree on peace with North Korea, and we can agree that their religious leader, one of the main peace activist, diplomacy-oriented clergy folks, shouldn't be in prison. 82-year-old woman who just had heart surgery shouldn't be in prison for some silly handbag or whatever it is, right? And so, it's a relationship. That's where I'm headed to tomorrow. We are going to premiere. I do have a long video compilation premiering here on the channel tomorrow. It's called Doing Anti-Imperialism. So keep your eye out for that. But yeah, tomorrow I'm going to be in the streets, raising awareness about that case. Keep an eye out. There'll be some video of that afterwards. You can check out the details of the case here in this article by Phil. Great work, Phil, if you're watching. Yeah, I mean, we got to do what we got to do. And yeah, I'm trying to think what else is going on other than our event coming up in New Jersey. It's going to be great. We're going to honor some local New Jersey activists. All kinds of great things are happening. So on that note, I guess I will start answering people's questions. Again, if you would like to ask a question, buy me a coffee. Best way to send questions for the second half of the show. We got 3 questions, 2 that came from Richard after the stream, and 1 that just came from someone named Sam. And then I'll just keep answering questions until it's done. So send in some questions, buy me a coffee. All right. So Richard says, debunk people who say Hitler, Mussolini, and Nicholas II were heroes against usury. How to debunk these retards in public? And why do they all like Gaddafi for some dumbass reason? I mean, wasn't Gaddafi basically a Soviet and Chinese ally? Okay. Richard, I understand your frustration. And it really just gets back to, unfortunately, you're not going to convince these people with an internet argument. There's some of them that may be convinced by an internet argument, but they're a small minority. We have to build an in real life organization that is organizing and going out on the streets and presents our version of events while doing it. And that is what will win over the best and brightest. But the internet is full of people who don't want to be convinced. No one on the internet ever admits they were wrong. No one on the internet ever, I mean, it's just, internet is really a bad place for debates. Now, a couple things in there. So first of all, I mean, Nicholas II was heavily invested and tied in with Western banks. And in fact, the reason that we know, the treaty about the Sykes-Picot agreement, where the borders of the Middle East were drawn up, is because the Tsar signed on to it, right? The Bolsheviks leaked the Sykes-Picot agreement during World War I. The Allied powers met and they agreed on where the borders were going to be in the Middle East during World War I. And the Bolsheviks took power and they got access to it, and they leaked the secret treaty of the Sykes-Picot agreement. And the Tsar's government sat down with the Rothschilds and with the British, and they drew up the British mandate of Palestine. They drew the borders of Syria. The Tsar's government, they were weak. They were not in a strong position. They were not respected very much by the Western powers, but they were not in some great level of opposition. They were on the American, British, and French side in World War I. They drew the borders of the Middle East, etc. Now, Mussolini was backed by the British, and that's documented. British intelligence funded him to fight communists in post-World War I Italy. And Nazi Germany is an even more interesting case. If you want to learn about the economics of Nazi Germany, the book that I read that I learned the most about Nazi Germany from is a book called Hitler's Banker. And it's a biography of Hjalmar Schacht, who was the main economist of Nazi Germany. And reading that book helped me really understand the Nazi economy, right? There's so much out there. You go to any of these bookstores, they got Hitler's Dog, the 3-part biography, Hitler's Niece, Hitler's Cousin, Inside Hitler's Banker. Did Hitler have this disease? Did Hitler have that disease? Was Hitler gay? Was Hitler secretly Jewish? Why did Hitler dress the way he dressed? They had all kinds of books about Hitler. Every book you ever wanted to know about Hitler, and you will learn nothing from those books. They are just, dry celebrity, it's this weird, it's almost normal, right, for middle-aged man to develop odd fascination with Hitler, and become an expert on Hitler's dog and Hitler's cousin and Hitler's sheep and Hitler's favorite, hunting rifle, or I guess he didn't hunt. And none of that will help you learn anything, because you're not learning about the political and economic conditions that gave rise to the Nazi regime. Read Hitler's Banker by Hjalmar Schacht, and you will learn about what was going on there. That basically Germany was an imperialist country that was stripped of its colonies at the end of World War I. And then, they got their colonies back, and that they were in debt to American and British banks, and the Nazi state refused to pay them back. But the Nazi state was very much, enabled, because they saw it as an enemy of the Soviet Union, and they used degrowth methods to stabilize the German economy. And you can read all about that. Read Hitler's Banker by Hjalmar Schacht. That's a good piece, I would recommend. If you want to learn about the economics of Nazi Germany, the economics of Italy, it's Togliatti, the Italian communist leader, has a series of lectures, which I think I have up here. And when you read Togliatti's lectures on Italian fascism, do I have that up here? I have it somewhere. What you learn is that Italian fascism, now here it is. Yeah, Togliatti gave this series of lectures on the economics of Italian fascism. And you read it, you learn that Italian fascism, they were making it up as they went along. And a lot of people think that if you read Mussolini's writings, you can understand the nature of fascist Italy, and that's not true. They were constantly reinventing the Italian fascist economy because they didn't know what they were doing. There was obviously there was the corporatism and the economic theories that Mussolini espoused when he was coming to power. But once he was in power, they redid it 6 or 7 times. And towards the end, they were almost a colony of Nazi Germany. And I mean, this is, you read Togliatti's lectures on fascist economics, you'll learn a lot about how fascist Italy, it was all over the place. It was an attempt to stabilize capitalism with a very authoritarian state. And that authoritarian state changed its economic policies constantly. So there we go. As far as the next part, why do they like Gaddafi? Because Gaddafi and most of the Arab nationalists, Gaddafi, he considered himself an Arab nationalist when he first came to power. Now, in the late 80s, he broke with the Arab world and declared he was African, which I think is fascinating, right? But in the Green Book, the first book CPI ever published was the Green Book by Gaddafi. It was our own edition of the Green Book by Gaddafi. In the Green Book, there's a chapter called Black People Will Prevail in the World. He predicted that Africa was the future of humanity because Africa had the highest birth rate. And he said, Africa has the highest birth rate and they have a huge amount of untapped natural resources. Black people, give it 100 years or so, Black people are going to be the leading race. They're going to be the most powerful and most prosperous people on the planet. That was a big prediction that Gaddafi made. And he made it, when he published the Green Book. And in the late 80s, he announced, you know what? We're not Arabs anymore. Libya is having its African pivot. We're now an African nation. That was a really big deal, right? A lot of Libyans are lighter skinned. They're Moorish, North Africans. But Gaddafi basically announced we're no longer an Arab country. However, in the 70s and 80s, Gaddafi was considered part of Arab nationalism. He was aligned with Abdel Nasser in Egypt. He was aligned with the Ba'athist states of Syria and Iraq. And the Arab nationalist states very much promoted what, this crowd calls the JQ, because Israel was their main enemy, right? And opposing Israel and opposing the West, which was backing Israel, was a big part of their identity. And Gaddafi did fund some right-wing nationalist groups in Europe, okay? So based on the fact that he talked about Israel and stuff like that, and based on the fact that he funded some far-right groups in Europe, that's why these guys like Gaddafi. And Obama killed him, and Obama's a Democrat, right? And there's a lot of Republicans that like Gaddafi, right? We've been to Republican rallies, and we can sell the Green Book. We say, read the book about the woman, or read the book about the great African leader that was killed by Hillary Clinton, and a lot of Trumpers will buy the Green Book from us. We've sold. I've been standing there with other CPI members. Read the book. We did this at Rage Against the War Machine. We sold bundles of the Green Book because a lot of MAGA like Trump people are interested in Gaddafi, right? So Gaddafi, there is a right wing appeal to him. But it's complicated. But yeah, the far right. When I debated this guy, Cultured Thug, who's a far right internet personality, I debated him, and one thing that he said was that he loved Italy's fascist government of Mussolini, and he also loved Gaddafi. And I said, no. The national hero of Libya is a guy who Mussolini killed, Omar Mukhtar. And in fact, Gaddafi paid for a movie. Gaddafi made a movie called The Lion in the Desert, which is a great movie, Lion in the Desert. A movie made in 1981, paid for by the Libyan government, about the anti-colonial national hero of Libya who fought against Mussolini. So the idea that one could like both Mussolini and Gaddafi, no, does not compute. Gaddafi saw himself as the inheritor of an anti-Mussolini fighter. And that what I noticed about this Cultured Thug guy is if you ever mentioned that, he would say, oh, that was just a big mistake. And, like one thing is that monarchies, right? In Spain and in Italy, the fascists were monarchists. And he said, oh, that was a mistake. And it's like every time you brought up real policies that fascism is tied to, he'd say, oh, that was a mistake. And that if you understood what he believed, he didn't like the woke left. He was socially conservative. And, he liked, the authoritarianism of fascist states. And he also liked some of their anti-capitalist rhetoric. That was really, the guy's not a very deep thinker. He's really not that deep of a thinker. He's critical of capitalism, but he thinks woke people are communists and he hates them. And he likes the fascist aesthetic of uniforms and saluting and stuff like that. And he ain't that deep. And I think that's a lot of the people that you're dealing with and you're complaining about there, Richard. And they don't really know that much. And a lot of, I mean, it's the same problem. I hate to admit this. It's the same problem the communists have, which is people become a communist in America to offend people, right? Because communists are so hated. People become fascists for the same reason, to offend people, not to actually understand the world, not to actually change the world, but to offend people, especially fascists, right? Nothing could be more offensive than being a fascist, right? So these guys are not thinking too deeply, right? They just want to offend people. And so, of course, if you argue with them logically, you're not going to hear it. Look, there was somebody who left a comment on my video about the defeat the British Empire system, and I read the comment, and I gave like kind of a very angry reply, and then I actually gave a much more mild reply. But he basically was saying that my video about the British Empire system and talking about how the British Empire kept slavery intact in the United States and all of that, he basically said I was defending the Confederacy. And he was just, I was defending the Confederacy, and the British Empire abolished slavery. And by saying that the British Empire was propping up slavery in America, I was trying to say that Americans weren't evil. And I looked at the guy's comment, and basically what he's saying is, I am angry about what Black people in America have been subjected to, which is, I mean, completely justified. I'm not going to argue against that. But I'm angry at white Americans for it. And if you point out that slavery was an extension of the British Empire economic system, that takes away my ability to blame my white neighbors for what I went through and what I've experienced and what my people have been through. And that's what I'm in this for. I want my anger and my resentment toward my white neighbors to be justified. Well, I'm sorry. I mean, you have the right to resent anybody. You have the right to be angry, but, a very, very, very small minority of white people in the South owned slaves, right? The slave owners were like 2% of the population. Obviously all the white people were somewhat complicit with slavery, but the slave owning faction of the white people of the South was a very, very, very small minority of very, 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 very wealthy people. But there's this narrative that has been developed by Black Lives Matter and by college identity politics, where all the white people of the South were all slave owners. All the white people in the South were slave owners, and that's not true. And it's interesting because that narrative follows Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind presents it the same way, right? The racist propaganda film created by Hollywood says the same thing. All the white people were living like, I do declare, Captain Butler, I'm going to have me a beautiful party. And it's like, that's the white supremacist myth, right? That after the Civil War, after Reconstruction was overturned, the Democrats tried to tell all the white people, you were wealthy slave owners, until the darn anti-racist Republicans and Yankees ruined it all. And they weren't. And it's this weird thing where I've noticed woke people and white supremacists believe the same shit, and they're both full of crap, right? Woke people and white supremacists both believe that all the Southern whites were super rich people living off the backs of Black people. That's not actually true. White workers in the South, their wages were exponentially lower than white workers in the North because they were competing with people who worked for free. And the overturn of slavery was a victory for all working people in America, most especially the enslaved Africans, but all working people saw their living standards go up, their wages increased, their access to education and things increased with the overturning of slavery. And it was the Democrats, the racist Democrats of Woodrow Wilson and others, who worked really hard to erode that and say, no. The defeat of slavery was somehow a loss for white people. And they accused the Republican Party of stabbing the white race in the back and giving good, jobs to Black people instead of good, hardworking white people, blah, 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 blah. That was the Democratic Party's propaganda. And all those Confederate statues didn't go up immediately after the Civil War. They went up in the 19-teens and 20s as part of a propaganda campaign by the Democrat Party to convince poor whites in the South that anti-racism was an attack on them. And it's bullshit. And what disturbs me is woke people believe the same shit. Woke people believe that all the white people of the South benefited from slavery. They're just bad because of it. Well, that's the Democrat Party propaganda. White people of the South were impoverished due to slavery. And the reason the Democrats were building those Confederate statues, and I saw that guy in the chat, but I realized I'm not having an argument with him about facts. I'm having an argument about the fact that he's angry and he wants a justification for being mad at his white neighbors. Well, I'm not going to win the argument because he's got a lot to be mad about. I mean, I can only imagine. And, so if by pointing out that slavery was part of an economic order of the British Empire, if that gets in the way of him being angry, it takes away his right to be angry, he's not going to listen to me. And when you're arguing with these people on the internet, these people that are into this, Nick Fuentes stuff, you're arguing against, they're trying to be edgy. They want to offend everybody. They want to be like, ooh, I'm racist. What are you going to do about it? So you're not going to win the argument with them, right? They've adopted that kind of trigger the libs politics because they want to offend people, right? And that's the problem. It serves an emotional need for them. What they call extremist politics in America, of the left and of the right. It's serving an emotional need for people. It's not an intellectual thing, unfortunately. And I'm just as guilty of this. When I was in my 20s and I was a communist, it was serving an emotional need for me. And I got over that, and I matured and I learned and I've changed how I see a lot of things. But, but if people take a position because it gives them a level of emotional validation, it's a way to say, you all are evil and I'm good. You're not going to convince them intellectually. They're going to have to learn through life experience or through trying to build a real organization and realizing how difficult. You can't build a real organization on the basis of let's all be angry at everyone else. So, I mean, yeah, there you go. There you go. All right. And then, Richard continues, why are anti-Zionist conservatives all retarded? Again, I wouldn't use that language. Not Marjorie and Tucker. Okay. Again, very little experience. Very little experienced. He's recommending I bring back a book that I wrote that I took off the market, and yeah, I mean, again, people will learn through experience. People will learn through the balance of forces. And some people will learn because they see us as a real organization getting stuff done and they want to be involved in that, and they'll learn our ideology through that. And some people will be swayed by intellectual arguments, but intellectual arguments are not the primary way. And that's just what I'm having to respond with, Richard, that, yeah, I'm not against you arguing with these people. And the other thing to remember about arguing on the internet is that you're not always trying to convince the person you're arguing with. Other people see the argument and absorb it, and then there's people on the fence that watch those arguments. So go ahead and argue with these people. I don't think you're going to convince them necessarily. And ultimately, the real way to convince people is to build the movement, build the organization, provide the services, be involved in the struggles, and people will join your ranks or will get involved with the activities that you are doing and absorb the teachings upon which your organization is founded that way. It's kind of like Jesus said, know them by their fruits. They said to Jesus, there's all these people saying they're the Messiah. How do we know that you're the right one? He said, know them by their fruits, right? So at the end of the day, know them by their fruits. Now, Sam says, I heard that Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait because they were selling their oil too low, which bankrupted Iraq. Then the USA tempted Iraq to invade and then turned on them. Is this true? And can you tell me the history surrounding this conflict, possibly the Iran war, and the reasons for them? Yes, I can. So Iraq was an Arab nationalist, secular, Baathist Arab socialist state. Iran had the Islamic Revolution of Iran. Iran is not an Arab country. They're Persians. They're the Persian ethnic group. Persians and Arabs have a history of not getting along with each other. But the majority of Iraqis are Shia Muslims. And Iraq's government was secular under Saddam Hussein. And Saddam Hussein and a lot of his inner circle were Sunnis, even though the majority of the Iraqi people are Shia. So when Iran had the Islamic Revolution of Iran, there was a Shia majority population, and there was a religious Shia minority that was angry, that didn't want a secular government, that was angry that Saddam Hussein's cronies and inner circle were all Sunni. And so Saddam Hussein very much feared that the Islamic Revolution would spread into Iraq. And that actually made a lot of sense, because at the beginning, the Islamic Revolution of Iran was not just for Iran, it was a global revolution. And many Shia thought it was the end times. They thought Imam Khomeini was the last Imam, and that it was some kind of apocalyptic scenario. So Saddam Hussein very much feared that there was going to be a Shia Muslim uprising against him. And so, Saddam Hussein and Iran, they had a war that went on and on and on, and the USA manipulated both sides. The Soviet Union wanted to end the war and was friendly to both sides and was constantly trying to get the war to just end. The Soviet Union, it was trading a lot and giving weapons to Iraq, but it was trying to establish good relations with Iran, and it was a mess, and it was an absolute mess. Now, the Gulf War, what that was about was, yes, the USA basically gave Iraq permission to invade Kuwait. And then as soon as Iraq did it, then they played up a huge amount of propaganda saying that, they had the Naria testimony, the woman crying about the babies, and they just they made it sound like it would come out of nowhere, even though the USA basically gave Iraq permission to do it. And then they played up the idea Iraq is ruthlessly murdering those Kuwaiti people. We just got to go help them. We just love them so much. And so then the USA went into Kuwait. And at that point, Iraq retreated. Iraq didn't want to fight the United States. They wanted to fight Kuwait, and they thought America was okay with that. So they retreated, and they got onto the highways. And then the U.S. Army slaughtered the Iraqi army as they were retreating. It was the highway of death. It was an episode of just absolute cowardice, shooting people in the back. A retreating army. The Iraqis were trying to get the hell out of Kuwait as fast as they could, and the U.S. murdered them as they were fleeing the country. And it was an episode of just utter evil. And what it was almost, it served like a propaganda purpose. It was like they were trying to say that America was a resurgent country and the Soviet Union was falling and all this stuff. And the famous quote from Bush Sr. He said, "I've cured the Vietnam syndrome." And it was like a war that was designed to be very short. And it was a moment where the USA could just go in and they say, "Oh, we rescued Kuwait," and all of this. And it was very staged, and it was very fake, and it was very awful. And the Naria testimony was staged. I mean, that was not really, she didn't really see what she saw. She was a member of the Kuwaiti royal family, and they showed her on CNN nonstop. That was kind of the atrocity propaganda they used before they go in, where they used cable news to just play on loop this image that just plucked everyone's heartstrings and said they got to intervene. Yeah, that's what happened. Ramsey Clark, the former U.S. Attorney General, he wrote a pretty good book about it called The Fire This Time. I've got it somewhere on the shelf over there. It's A History of the Gulf War by Ramsey Clark, Fire This Time. So yeah, pretty awful thing. I don't quite know what to say about it. The other thing about that whole episode that people talk about is that it was, that's when the whole, you can never protest a war because you're disrespecting our military. That's when that really got started. They had the yellow ribbons that had come from the Iran hostage crisis. The yellow ribbons. And the idea was that, we got to support our troops and support the military. They had a huge parade in Manhattan for the U.S. military. They had a huge military parade in Manhattan where they spent like millions of dollars on confetti and stuff like that. Yeah, it was, the USA had won the Cold War, and it was an attempt to, I don't know, it was a propaganda thing, but it was against Iraq, which was an anti-imperialist socialist state, and it was about the Middle East. It was about Israel. Iraq had been shooting missiles at Israel and had been supporting Palestinian resistance. It served a number of purposes, but it was neocons. It was the neocons kind of flexing their muscles. And it was awful. And they weren't ready to invade Iraq. They waited a decade after, crippling Iraq with horrendous sanctions that were condemned by the United Nations and all kinds of bodies that killed all kinds of civilians. And they banned medicine from going to Iraq. They made it so Iraq couldn't have a water system, where they couldn't have clean drinking water. And it was horrendous what they did to Iraq in the 90s. And they just devastated the country for a decade and then invaded. So there you go. John McCarthy says, Lavrov gave an important interview to Corriere del Sera, and it was so brilliant and insightful, they actually refused to publish it. Interesting. That's interesting. This is an interview Sergei Lavrov gave to the Italian newspaper Corriere del Sera, which the newspaper then refused to publish without cuts and censorship. That's very interesting. Russian diplomats are geniuses. I will just say that, right? Whether it's Lavrov, whether it's Maria Zakharova, I mean, they have this brilliant way of explaining things. They have this like brilliance about them. I mean, I have been in the same room as Lavrov, as Maria Zakharova. They have this way of just nailing it that is very brilliant. Okay, next question. Are you against accelerationism? Can our voting pattern cause accelerationism? Do you think Trump's policies accelerate this course? Okay, so my understanding of what accelerationism is that accelerationism is a deviant strategy where you advocate against the interests of your own class. That, accelerationists are those who say we want conditions to get worse because that will lead to a revolution. And it is considered a deviation because, for a couple reasons. One, bad conditions in and of themselves do not make a revolution. A revolution is not made simply by bad conditions. A revolution is made by a crisis within the ruling class, within society, the masses of people coming into motion, and a revolutionary organization transforming that motion by the people into a seizure of power. It takes three ingredients to make a revolution. One of bad conditions is not one of them. Bad conditions can lead to a crisis within society, and that crisis within society can lead to the masses being in motion, and then the revolutionary organization can lead the masses in motion. But so bad conditions can set the stage for it potentially, but bad conditions in and of themselves don't make it. And if you have bad conditions, but you don't have a crisis within society and the people don't rebel, or you have a crisis and you have the people rebelling, but there's no organization capable of transforming it, they can actually make things worse. And the main way the revolutionary organization wins the trust of the people is by winning great victories for the people. And if the conditions just get worse, but there's no one fighting back and there's no one organizing, or if the revolutionary organization appears to be working against the interests of the people, why should the people follow it? Right? If the revolutionary organization is going around trying to get people to be poorer and trying to get the conditions to be worse, when the people organize to fight against their conditions, they're not going to follow the Revolutionary Party, because the Revolutionary Party is helping they're part of the problem. They're making things worse. The way the Revolutionary Party gains credibility and builds up its strength is by being the people's advocate. This kind of thinking has been around during Occupy Wall Street. One of the arguments that was frequently made, this was an argument that got very heated many times, is that Occupy Wall Street said we should have no demands. And we would say, no, you want to have demands. So working people will see that the movement is advocating what they want. And if those demands are reached, then that will show the movement is strong. We wanted Occupy Wall Street to demand full employment. That was what we said. And the argument that all these young anarchists made is they said, well, all the government has to do to kill Occupy Wall Street then is give everyone a job. And it's like the government's not just going to give everyone a job. Do you know how difficult it would be to create a situation where the government felt compelled to give every person a job? Number one, that would require a very intense mass movement. Number two, if that did happen, if you were able to build a movement so massive and so strong that they forced the government to enact universal employment, that would be a huge boost. People would see, wow, if we go out and organize, we can win great victories. And so then they would demand that those jobs pay a really high wage, and that would be a boost. Right? And that, like, the idea that we just want everything to go to hell and then people will revolt. No, they won't. And if they revolt, if things go to hell and people revolt and there's no revolutionary organization, it doesn't lead anywhere. And if things just go to hell, generally what that leads is people becoming demoralized, right? It leads to bitterness and demoralization and hopelessness. That's what ultimately, if things just go to hell, that's what results, right? Now, if things get worse, but the masses build effective resistance and an organization, that's different. But if accelerationism seems to be predicated, as I understand it, I know there's a new interpretation out there of what accelerationism is, but my understanding of accelerationism is it's the belief that we want to make things go to hell and make things worse so that we have a revolution. And they don't understand the nature of revolution, right? They just don't. Revolutions are not made by things getting worse. They're made by a mass movement that responds to conditions. They're made by a revolutionary organization. Look, if I learned anything, right, that you read Lenin, when the old system is capable of going in the old way, there are three factors in making a revolution. One, a serious crisis within society, a crisis that includes not just the masses, but the ruling class. Two, a mass rebellion and mass movement of people among the people. And third, a revolutionary organization capable of transforming the mass rebellions among the people into a struggle for the seizure of power. And if you don't have those three things, you don't have a revolution. It's that simple, right? And if you have two of those three things, you don't get a revolution. And that there are many situations we have seen around the world that have actually made things worse. Egypt, for example, during the Arab Spring, the Egyptian government was overthrown. Hosni Mubarak, the Egyptian dictator, US-backed president for a long time, was ousted. And Egypt today is worse off. Egypt is worse off. What? There was a serious crisis in society, right? There was an economic crisis, mass unemployment in Egypt. On top of that, there was mass rebellions among the people. And now Egypt is worse off. It didn't make things any better, right? You look at Egypt, Egypt is worse off than it was because they had not a revolution. Conditions were very bad. As a result, there was a crisis in society. There were mass rebellions, but there was no revolutionary organization capable of transforming those rebellions into something serious. You had the Muslim Brotherhood, which is awful, right? And you had, the Egyptian military that's trained and funded by the American government and is very corrupt and whatever. And so the Egyptian, leader, Hosni Mubarak, was brought down, and they had an election, and the Muslim Brotherhood won. And the Muslim Brotherhood's awful. And, they had the majority of the votes. A lot of very poor people voted for them. But the business community and everyone in Egypt that's not a Muslim Brotherhood person, and particularly the Christian community, but also the communists and also the trade unionists, and a lot of people really didn't like the Muslim Brotherhood. And after a while, the Egyptian military overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood. And so the Muslim Brotherhood mobilized their people and got all the poor people to protest for them. And the Egyptian military then slaughtered them. And now the Egyptian military is in power, al-Sisi. And, the Muslim Brotherhood forces have been slaughtered. There's a river of blood between secular Egyptians who support the military and the Muslim Brotherhood. And Egypt is about back where it started before. And for a while, it looked like maybe al-Sisi was going to engage in some development projects and be a Bonapartist, but he's not. And Egypt is about where it was before, except it's worse, right? The Muslim Brotherhood was was not going to make a revolution. They just represent merchants, and they're CIA, and they're horrible. And the Egyptian military in the past has been a good force, right? And then under Abdel Nasser, they created socialism and all of that, but they've become very corrupted and all of that. And now Egypt's worse off than they were before because, if all you need is bad conditions, Egypt should be great, right? And that first of all, it's not simply bad conditions, right? It's a dramatic change in conditions that tends to spark big uprisings, number one. And number two, big uprisings in and of themselves don't really lead to the seizure of power unless there's a revolutionary organization. And that there's a lot of confusion where people just think bad conditions equals revolution. Wrong. And that seems to be what accelerationism as a movement is predicated on, this assumption that bad conditions make a revolution. And no, they don't. Okay. So Penny has a video of Fisco versus the European Union that she wants me to show. And unless anyone has any more questions, you can send via Buy Me a Coffee. Then I'm going to call it a night. So Yeah. All righty. Hold on. Hold your horses. All right. So we're going to watch Fizko and from Slovakia. And if anyone has any more Buy Me a Coffee, you can send them. And if not, then we're done. So, yeah, I'm downloading Penny's video of Fizko. So, yeah, send any question you got via Buy Me a Coffee. And if not, then we're done. So send me any questions. Last call, final call, final call. All right. Here's Penny's video. Oh, here we go.
Poprvé, Európskej únii chýba líderstvo. Keď pred pár rokmi bola v Európskej únii Merkelová alebo Sarkozy, tak to fungovalo tak, že sa nám to moc nepáčilo, lebo sme často čakali na stretnutie Merkelovej a Sarkozyho, že na čom sa dohodnú, a potom v podstate oznámili výsledok samotného stretnutia. Dnes nemáme v Európskej únii lídrov typu francúzskeho prezidenta alebo nemeckej spolkovej kancelárky, ktorí by určovali, že ako tá Európa má ísť, kam má ísť. Druhý veľký problém, ktorý máme v Európskej únii, je to, že absolútne nerešpektujeme iné názory. Absolútne. Ak niečo poviete iné, presne ako v denníku SME alebo v denníku N, koniec. Nemôžete povedať nič iné. Iný názor sa nepatrí. Ja sa vás teraz pýtam veľmi jednoducho. Európska únia chce prijať rozhodnutie, aby sme v rokoch 26 a 27 dali Ukrajine 140 miliard eur na vojenské výdavky. Prepáčte, vy s tým môžete súhlasiť, ja váš názor budem rešpektovať. Ja vám ale hovorím, že s týmto názorom nebudem nikdy súhlasiť. Nikdy. A odmietam, aby sa Slovensko zúčastnilo na akejkoľvek finančnej alebo inej schéme, ktorá dá Ukrajine na nasledujúce 2 roky 140 miliard na vojnu. Ja nechcem vojnu. Ja už chcem skončiť. A hovoril som o tejto vojne aj s Putinom, aj so Xi Jinpingom, so všetkými som o tom hovoril. Opakovane som povedal ruskému prezidentovi Putinovi, viete, čo je zvláštne, že ja sa stretnem s Putinom a potom mi všetci volajú. Čo ti povedal? Čo ti povedal? Ako bolo? Čo porozprával? Tak na to, však sa s ním stretnite, nech to vám povie. Ja sa stretnem so Xi Jinpingom, čo ti povedal? Ako bolo? Čo bolo? Kde bolo? Ako bolo? Všetkých nabádam na jednu vec a nabádal som to aj v decembri, keď som tam bol naposledy, alebo teda bol som aj samozrejme v máji na oslavách oslobodenia. Hovoril som prezidentovi Putinovi, pán prezident, preboha, prečo aspoň neurobíte nejaké prímerie? Na chvíľku, zastavte tie vojny, zastavte to vzájomné zabíjanie. Toto nechce ani Zelenský a toto nechce ani Putin. Čiže vinu kladiem obidvom rovnako, lebo som so Zelenským rovnako hovoril. Všade, kde chodíme, rozprávame, že toto je zabíjanie Slovanov a najväčším nešťastníkom z tejto vojny bude Ukrajina. Ukrajina bola použitá ako nástroj, mysliaci, že Rusko bude položené na kolená v tejto vojne, ale to tak nie je. Pozerajte sa, v akom stave je naozaj ruská ekonomika, ani zďaleka nie je taká mladý muž, ako si myslíte. A myslím si, že je najväčší problém, že Európska únia ide poskytnúť 140 miliard eur na pokračovanie vojny. Viete, koľko mladých bude pozabíjaných? Však keď ste takí hrdinová v tých čiernych tričkách a tak strašne ste za tú vojnu, tak choďte. Choďte, počkajte, budete mať slovo, vydržte. Nebojte sa, ja vám neujdem. Ja neutekám ani pred kredom, ani pred nikým iným. Ja som tu, dobre? No, štrngajte, jak v novembri. Takže ešte raz. Mladý muž, choďte a postavte sa a choďte normálne. Tak, to je ono. Choďte bojovať na Ukrajinu, nech sa páči. Budeme radi. No, toto je presne to, o čom ja stále hovorím, že keď je iný názor, čo to, nefunguje to? Funguje to. Iný názor je nerešpektovaný. Iný názor. Máte to všetko nahraté poriadne? Dobre. Čiže študenti odišli po tom, čo som povedal, že keď chcete ísť bojovať, tak choďte, zoberte si samopaly a choďte sa tam zabíjať s Rusmi. Ja to absolútne principiálne odmietam. Dokončím ešte vašu otázku, ktorú ste postavili. Pán kolega, Oni nie sú schopní sa stretnúť. Rozumiete? Oni nie sú schopní, ani Putin so Zelenským, nie sú schopní ani sa len ruky podať. Bohužiaľ, nevedia. A preto si myslím, že rozhodnutie komisie alebo Európskej únie, že ideme teraz dať 140 miliard eur, znamená ďalšie a ďalšie pokračovanie vojny na Ukrajine. Mne to je veľmi ľúto. Mne to je veľmi ľúto, pretože toto je cesta do pekla. A k tej Venezuele, ku Kolumbii a ďalším veciam. Ja som mal možnosť zatiaľ iba 2-krát telefonicky hovoriť s prezidentom Trumpom, keď som mu blahoželal k zvoleniu, a o tom ešte raz sme spolu telefonovali. A my teraz čakáme na potvrdenie, že bude stretnutie kvôli podpisu tej medzivládnej dohody ohľadne jadrového reaktoru v Jaslovských Bohuniciach. Trump priniesol, pán kolega, do politiky prvky, ktoré tu nikdy neboli. A to sú prvky, ja ich nazývam, že biznisové prvky v politike. On je obchodník. On nemá problém povedať, že túto vojnu zastavíme, ale za to chcem dohodu o nerastných surovinách. Túto vojnu zastavím, ale chcem niečo iné. Je to vzácne, že tieto prvky prišli do politiky. Na druhej strane je veľmi nepredvídateľný. My nevieme, čo urobí zajtra, čo urobí pozajtra. Preto my len sledujeme, čo sa deje okolo toho boja s drogovými dealermi v Latinskej Amerike. A možno budete veriť, možno nie. Ja som mal byť minulý týždeň v Brazílii, v Venezuele a mali sme byť v Paname. To bola veľká cesta organizovaná kvôli životnému prostrediu. Ale mnohé krajiny to odriekli práve kvôli bezpečnostnej situácii, že nikto nevie, že idete na loďke a vás trafí raketa, lebo niekto má pocit, že tam veziete drogy. To je prezident Trump pri všetkej úcte. Ja naozaj rešpektujem každého jedného lídra na svete. Každého jedného, prosím, rešpektujeme sa. On je kouboj, viete. Priniesol prvky, ktoré v politike nikdy neboli. Ale na druhej strane buďme vďační za to, že tieto prvky priniesol, pretože ak by pokračovala Bidenová administratíva, bolo by to horšie, horšie a horšie. Je mi ľúto, že nemá väčší vplyv na tú vojnu na Ukrajine. Že nemá. On pochopil, pamätáte si jeho výroky, že keď budem prezident, do 24 hodín bude po vojne. Keby som ja bol prezident, nikdy táto vojna nie je. Trump je už skoro rok prezidentom a vojna stále je. Lebo má úplne iné príčiny a dôvody, ako si možno prečítame v nejakých denníkoch alebo v nejakých médiách. Pán kolega, ja to vidím a bohužiaľ ten príbeh ide z Európskej únie. 100-krát som viedol hádku pred všetkými premiérmi na tému ukrajinskej vojny. A povedal som, že vy viete, kolegyne, kolegovia, pýtam sa premiérov, čo sa dialo v roku 2014 v Odese? Ja chápem, že tieto zdroje nemáte. Mladí priatelia, počúvajte. To bolo masívne vyvražďovanie proruských občanov. Nikdy nebudem súhlasiť so 140 miliardami na Ukrajinu. Nebudem, lebo to sú 2 roky zabíjania. Ďalšie 2 roky zabíjania. Nestrelajte po mne. Ďakujem. Prepáčte, to bol žart. Takže zachovajte si, prosím, osobnú statočnosť. Netušili. Niekto im porozprával, dajte si čierne trička a dojdite na prednášku, lebo urobíme bordel. Aký bordel urobil? Čo urobil? Nič. Ukázali, že nie sú pripravení zdieľať iný názor. To je jediné, čo tu ukázali na dnešnom stretnutí.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, you know, it's like you see those kids mimicking the Velvet Revolution, and it's like, oh, look, we're repeating the Western line against our own country. Look at us. And it's just like, you know. I mean, I'm impressed. I will say between the Russian president, the Belarusian president, you know, we have a new caliber of leadership, of leaders who can really explain what they're doing and really understand world events and take them very seriously. And I mean, you see him, that's a real statesman. I shouldn't even say politician. That's what I spoke with Russian President Putin in the video. If you watch it, I talked about statecraft, right? He's, you know, that we have politicians like Kamala Harris that read off the teleprompter, that get up and have one-liners. We have statecraft, serious leaders. The overthrow of communism, the overthrow of the Czechoslovakian government in 1989. It was the CIA bringing down the Marxist-Leninist government of Czechoslovakia. You know, so there we go. If you want to send any more questions, send them this way. I see one question did come in from, you know, there's not a name. There's just like a a number or whatever, but the question was, do you think communists should support democratic socialists like Zoran? Well, as far as like communists, I mean, we are calling ourselves innovationists now. What does a communist even mean anymore? Right? At this point, communist means woke person to most people. The communist groups are insane and irrelevant. And, we're building the innovationist movement, but we take what was good from communism: pro-development, pro-humanity, anti-globalism, anti-imperialism, right? The desire for a government of action that fights for working families. But, should we vote for Zoran? I will not tell how I voted because I think there's a very strong case for voting for him and a very strong case, if just as strong, if not stronger, for voting against him. And the reason to vote for Zoran would be that Zoran was running an election that basically became a referendum on U.S. support for genocidal Israel. New York City is a stronghold of Zionism, and that in New York City, it's like almost impossible, to be a critic of Israel and not have your life destroyed. I mean, in New York City, Zionism has so much power, and Zoran, even though he's technically pro-Israel, he's just against what Israel's doing. He's anti-Netanyahu, but he's pro-Israel. They decided he's a Muslim, he's a terrorist, he's a communist, and they, oh my God. And I got to tell you, I should show this to you. Right. This is, do I have this? There's an image that I mean, it's just really telling. Do I have this image? I don't know if I downloaded it, but it just shows you how disgustingly Zionist New York City is. Right. And again, this is an argument for voting for Zoran, not saying I voted for him. And I will tell you the argument for voting against him, in a minute. I'm not telling how I voted, because I mean, there's a strong argument on either side, but let me just put this image on the screen. This is a news story from, New York City, right? And I mean, this is New York City. We have like insane gun control in New York City. You cannot have a hunting rifle or any gun without a permit, right? And it's like impossible to get a permit if you can't prove you're a cop or you have you need to have a gun for your armed security. We have like insane gun control in New York City. It's like impossible to get a gun. This is Brooklyn. Gun store in Brooklyn having record sales. It's a Jewish-owned gun store. And Jews are piling in there and applying for gun permits and getting guns because Zoran Mamdani has been elected. And he's going to kill all the Jews, I guess. And so they have to get guns for when Zoran comes and kills them for being Jews. I mean, it's so crazy, right? And keep in mind, you cannot have a gun in New York City. But I guess now you can if you're a Jew. I don't get how it works. But the other thing is, can you imagine if this was happening, if there was a Muslim gun store? You know what I'm saying? Like they have a Jewish gun store in Brooklyn. And in response to Mamdani getting elected, who they say is anti-Semitic, which he's not, right? He's just anti-Netanyahu. They're selling guns to Jews like crazy because they're all going to die because of, Mamdani getting elected. Could you imagine if there was a Muslim gun store, right? If in one of the Muslim neighborhoods in Queens, where there's a lot of Bangladeshis, or in Bay Ridge, where there's a lot of Arab Americans, if they had a store like this and there were a bunch of Muslim guys showing up in robes and turbans and buying guns, can you imagine what the response would be? I mean, it makes me angry just to see this. The fact the media can show this. It's not a scandal. No, well, these Jews have to protect themselves because somebody who disagrees with them got elected mayor. I mean, I believe in the right to own guns. I believe in the Second Amendment, but I don't like double standards. And I know that if there was anything like this for the Muslim community, there would be hell to pay. The story would be the Muslims are all buying guns so they can go on mass shootings. ISIS sets up shop. It would be crazy. And I also know that it is almost impossible to get a gun in New York City. Like, don't even think about getting a gun in New York City. Unless you're an armed security guard with a license, unless you're a cop, don't even think about it. But for some reason, loads of Jews in Brooklyn are going to a Jewish gun store and suddenly are getting gun licenses. I don't know how this is legally working out. And I also don't understand, like, it's all over the media. Oh, look, all these Jews are getting guns because they hate Mamdani. I mean, could you imagine if Bloomberg, we had a Jewish mayor, Bloomberg, if in response to Bloomberg getting elected, all the Muslims started getting guns? Can you imagine the response? But here, all these Jews, they're mad that we have a mayor, Mamdani, and so they're going to buy guns because they don't like the mayor. And there they are in their yarmulkes, getting their guns. Woo, look at us. We're getting guns because we don't like the mayor. I mean, if this doesn't piss you off about how unfair it is and how much our city is under the control of the Israel lobby and the Zionists, the fact this is even allowed, like, you can't get a gun, but somehow a bunch of Jews are arming themselves because they don't like the mayor. I mean, and the media is like, oh, okay, that's what they're doing, right? And there's no scandal, and it's treated like that's just what they do, which it would definitely would not be if it was Muslims. I mean, that right there. So that is a strong argument in Mamdani's favor, that it was a slap in the face to the political system and the political establishment here in New York City, where Zionists and Jews of the Zionist persuasion, and Zionism has so much influence and power. The Jewish community in New York City is so dominant that and so Mamdani running for office, even though he was not anti-Jewish, but because he was anti-Netanyahu, he was endorsed by a lot of Jewish people, a lot of Jewish, DSA in New York City is very, very Jewish, and they're the ones that nominated him. He spoke at synagogues, at Reformed Jewish synagogues, and reassured them he's not anti-Semitic. I mean, but regardless, there are so many like extreme Zionist Jews that are just so mad that he got elected, and his election was a repudiation of that. That's a really strong argument in his favor, and some of the policies he advocates. Free buses, that's fine. Right? Some of his policies are going to crush small businesses, though, right? I mean, if he does the minimum wage, a lot of businesses are going to go under. It's complicated, right? And his real estate policies are not going to be good. They're going to crush small building owners. They're going to benefit the big real estate monopolies. He's not addressing the real issue in New York City. The reason the rent keeps rising in New York City is because the apartment buildings are all empty, because the wealthy real estate companies, not most of which, but many of which are literally Israeli, not Jewish, Israeli, right? A big chunk of Brooklyn is owned by Israeli companies, and no one has to live in those apartments. The rent just keeps going up because it's like a gambling casino. It's real estate speculation. I did a story about Billionaires Row in New York City. Billionaires Row, the most expensive apartments in the world. It costs $2 million a month to live in some of these buildings. And the buildings are empty. They're empty. There's huge skyscrapers full of apartment buildings that cost $2 million a month. Nobody lives there. They're empty because it's just a gambling casino. I mean, it's infuriating, right? And his policies, are not addressing that. It's just, we're going to freeze the rent. And so all the small buildings, I live in an apartment building. It's owned by, the woman owns one building. Right. I mean, it's a nice building, and, she owns it, and she's owned it for a couple generations. And, if they freeze the rent, it's going to be hard for the woman who owns my building to keep owning it. But the real estate companies will be fine because no one's living in their buildings anyway. And so, smaller buildings will have to be sold, and the big real estate companies will sweep them up, and they'll keep raising the rent and making lots of money. It's, so some of Mamdani's economic policies are good. Some of them are not. Regardless, Mamdani getting elected was a huge slap in the face to the Israel lobby, and some of the economic policies will benefit people. So that's an argument for him. Argument against him is that he's not anti-establishment at all. He was endorsed by Obama. He was endorsed by Chuck Schumer. He's not anti-Israel. And he's psyching up a layer of young people who are interested in socialism and communism to join the campaign against Venezuela. He called Venezuela a brutal dictatorship, and he supports overthrowing Venezuela. He, and his DSA, they are evil motherfuckers, and they have waged hateful cancel culture campaigns against anyone, and they have Trump derangement syndrome, and their whole thing is that, and if you don't agree with transgender bathrooms and whatever their latest liberal whatever is, you're a Nazi, and you're, I mean, DSA is toxic. DSA is, is like the worst of the woke, and that he will embolden this kind of cadre of toxic woke people with Trump derangement syndrome, hysterical, woke people. It's a little bit disturbing, so I don't know. That's a strong argument for not voting for him. It's like, you don't want to strengthen this fake socialism that is, toxic and anti-working class and et cetera, and is psyching up young socialists to support war and imperialism. And he's not really anti-Israel, and that his election, it'll lead to demoralization because he's not going to be able to do half the shit he says he's going to do because he's in bed with the same establishment. And so I don't know. I mean, he's going to be the mayor. It's decided. Not telling how I voted. I might have voted for him and I might have voted against him. I'm not telling how I voted. But honestly, I mean, he's going to be the mayor. So we have to deal with it. We have to deal with Mamdani being the mayor. And we have to figure out, how do we maneuver within this? And do we put maybe there's ways locally that we can use the fact that Mamdani is anti-Israel, the fact that the people, attacking him are, maybe he will be in a position where he has to do some good. That would be great, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be great? I don't think we can count on it, but there you go. That's my position. All right. Any last questions? Any last questions? Nope. There don't seem to be any more questions. So I've got a big day tomorrow. So I'll be back. Dare to struggle, dare to win, everybody. I'm going to put on the closing music, and we'll be back probably Monday night. I don't think I'm going to stream tomorrow, but we're going to premiere a long video on this channel tomorrow about anti-imperialist activism, kind of showing what CPI has done. So tune in for that. We'll be back. Come to our event in New Jersey. Dare to struggle, dare to win.
New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.